The first time I saw the Airbnb, it was almost charming. Nestled in the arms of the unending forest, the house looked like something from a forgotten fairy tale. The windows caught the moonlight and threw back silver glimmers, almost as if it were winking at me, welcoming me to what would be my refuge from the world. I am Jack, by the way. Just a guy who thought a change of scenery would mend a heart shredded by too many goodbyes. I guess you could say I was running away from life itself. But as I stood at the threshold, luggage weighing heavily in my hand, the front door swung open and revealed a living room that seemed untouched by time. Soft light pooled on aged furniture, casting long shadows that clawed at the edges of my vision. That night, after I had settled in and let the silence of the surrounding woods lull me into a false sense of security, the peace was shattered. It started with footsteps, faint pacing above my head when I knew there was no second floor. Then whispers slid through the walls, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to mock my solitude. I found myself wide awake, staring at the ceiling as moonlight carved a path across my room. Each creak and groan of the house twisted my nerves tighter. It was like the place had a life of its own, one it wasn't keen on sharing with me. The next day was when I found them, the photographs. As I explored more of the house, I came across an album thick with dust. Within its pages were images of people who must have once called this place home. But their eyes had been savagely scratched out, leaving hollow voids that stared back at me. And as I pondered over this macabre discovery, doors that I distinctly remembered leaving open whispered shut with soft clicks that set my heart racing. Then came the storm, an ungodly tempest that howled through the trees and trapped me inside this aging structure. As lightning fractured the sky, shapes began to take form in my periphery, shapes that solidified into figures with blurred faces and desperate eyes. The ghosts of past residents were revealing themselves to me, each one seemingly trapped within these walls just as I was now. Panic clawed its way up my throat as I pieced together their silent stories. A family torn apart by betrayal, lovers caught in an endless waltz of sorrow, children whose laughter had been silenced too soon. Their whispers grew louder, and their presence pressed in on me from all sides. I knew then that I couldn't stay, not if I wanted to keep my sanity intact. Using what little wit remained within my terror-addled brain, I searched for clues and patterns in the chaos, anything to help me escape this nightmare. And finally, there it was, a glimmer of hope disguised in old letters tucked away beneath loose floorboards. They spoke of a secret, a way out hidden by those who had come before, but never managed to leave. With desperation lending speed to my movements, I made for what looked like an ordinary wall in the depths of the house's belly. My hands shook as they pressed against cold stone until one pushed through air instead, the outline of a door. I stumbled into the raging storm outside, not daring to look back as shadows reached for me from inside the house. Breathing hard, soaked to the bone but alive, I ran without stopping until civilization embraced me once more. Back in my own home now, there are moments when I catch myself staring into corners or jumping at sounds that are too close to whispers or footsteps from above. And sometimes when lightning splits open the dark belly of night skies, I wonder if they are still there, watching from windows that reflect moonlight in ghostly manners, waiting for someone else to share their fate. And last night I received a letter with no return address. Inside was just a photo of that old Airbnb residence, and on the back written one single chilling word: return. Stresses of work had piled up, and the city's constant noise felt suffocating. That's when I stumbled upon an isolated cabin nestled in the woods, a few hours' drive from the city. It was perfect, the kind of solitude I was craving. The host, a man named John, had glowing reviews, and the price was surprisingly affordable for such a short notice. I booked it without a second thought, packing my bags with a sense of urgency that had been foreign to me for months. I arrived late in the afternoon. The cabin was more secluded than I had anticipated. The last stretch of the drive was through a densely wooded area, the kind of place where the silence is so profound it's almost loud. The cabin itself was a rustic beauty, wooden logs, a stone chimney, and windows that promised a view of the forest in all its winter glory. I found the key under the mat, just as John had instructed, and settled in. The first night was peaceful, the silence a welcome change from the city's cacophony. But by the second night, the sense of isolation began to wear on me. I noticed things, small things that seemed off. There was a picture on the living room wall, a painting of the cabin, but with a figure standing by the window that I was sure hadn't been there before. I chalked it up to my overactive imagination, fueled by the isolation. The next day, I decided to explore the surrounding woods. There was a freshness to the air, crisp and invigorating. But as I wandered further, I found something unsettling. A makeshift shrine hidden among the trees, dolls made of sticks and twine, their faces carved into grotesque expressions. It was disturbing, the kind of thing you'd expect to find in a horror movie, not in your Airbnb's backyard. Feeling unnerved, I returned to the cabin, intending to call John and inquire about the shrine. However, the cabin had no signal, and the landline, which I had not noticed before, was dead. That night, things escalated. I heard footsteps outside, crunching in the snow. Every rational explanation I tried to come up with fell short. I was alone, miles from the nearest neighbor, and the footsteps sounded deliberate, pacing back and forth outside the windows. I checked the locks on the doors and windows, barricading myself in the bedroom. The isolation I had sought was now a prison. Every creak of the cabin's settling frame sounded like an attempt to enter. I didn't sleep that night, jumping at shadows and the wind's howl. The following morning, I decided to confront the situation. Armed with a kitchen knife, I checked the cabin's perimeter. That's when I saw footprints in the snow, leading away from the cabin and disappearing into the woods. The realization that someone had been out there, watching, waiting, sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I packed my things, ready to leave, when I found a note pinned to the door. "Hope you enjoyed your stay. Don't come back." It was unsigned, but the message was clear. The isolation, the shrine, the footsteps, they were all warnings, and I had overstayed my welcome. I drove away from the cabin, leaving the solitude I had once craved behind. The experience left me with a lingering sense of unease, a reminder that sometimes isolation can be more dangerous than the chaos of the city. The Airbnb listing disappeared the next day, and my attempts to contact John went unanswered. Reflection. Looking back, I realized that the horror didn't come from the supernatural or the overtly menacing. It was the realization that in seeking isolation, I had made myself vulnerable, a target for those who lurk in the shadows of such secluded places. The true horror lies in the unpredictability of human intentions, masked by the anonymity of an online listing and the solitude of a cabin in the woods. The experience has stayed with me, a cautionary tale of the dangers that can come with the search for solitude. It's a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that could happen to any of us, in any place where we might least expect it. The air was crisp, the sort that bites at your cheeks and reminds you of the coming winter. Our destination, a remote Airbnb cabin, stood nestled among the trees that were like silent sentinels watching over us. The wood planks of the cabin held the warm glow of a home that promised laughter and memories. My name is Mike, and with my friends and my loyal dog Max, we were eager for a weekend escape from the city's constant clamor. The sun dipped below the horizon as we arrived, casting long shadows that stretched out from the forest's edge. The porch light flickered, feeble against the encroaching night. We didn't mind, though. The isolation was part of the charm. We joked about ghost stories and unexplored trails as we pulled our bags from the car, Max energetically bounding around our feet, his nose twitching at the scents carried on the wind. Inside, the cabin was all warm woods and soft cushions. We settled in quickly, stoking up the fireplace until flames licked at the logs and cast dancing shadows on the walls. Laughter filled the space, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. But as night took hold, the forest seemed to press in closer. The sounds that during daylight were background music became ominous whispers between the trees. Branches tapped against windows like curious fingers searching for a way in. I laughed it off, saying it was just animals or the wind. Max wasn't so easily fooled, though. His ears stood straight up, and he stared out into the blackness beyond our safe haven with an intensity that made my heart beat just a bit faster. The power outage caught us all off guard. One minute we were engulfed in light and warmth. The next, plunged into an uneasy darkness with only the fireplace's glow to hold back total blackness. Outside, footsteps thudded on the porch, deliberate and heavy, too loud to be a forest creature and too erratic to be human. Max's growl was low and guttural, a sound I'd never heard from him before. It raised hairs on my neck as he moved towards the door, his body tensed like a coiled spring. Before any of us could react further, chaos erupted. The door burst open with a violence that splintered wood and sent a cold rush of air into the room. Men, strangers, loomed in the doorway. Their faces were obscured by shadows, but the cold glint of metal in their hands was unmistakable. Fear froze us where we stood, except Max. His barks tore through the silence like warning sirens as he launched himself at our intruders with a ferocious courage I didn't know he possessed. In that heart-stopping moment, amidst shouts and snarls and scrambling feet, my survival instincts kicked in. I grabbed an arm, a friend's arm, and we moved. There was no plan other than escape as I directed us towards a window at the back of the cabin. We clambered through it into the unknown forest beyond. The woods were a labyrinth in darkness. Moonlight barely filtered through dense canopies above us as we ran without direction or purpose other than to put distance between ourselves and danger. Branches clawed at our skin and clothes. Thorns bit into us with sharp teeth, while our breaths came out in misty puffs that made our chests ache. I don't know how long we ran, or how we managed to evade capture with only fear as our guide. But when light began to seep into the sky, turning it from black to bruised purple to soft dawn pink, I knew we were safe, or as safe as one can feel after such terror. We stumbled onto an open road just as full daylight embraced us, a weary group of haunted survivors whose relief was tempered by what we had left behind. We turned back once to look at our once peaceful retreat, now transformed into something from which we narrowly escaped. As I write this now, safe within my own walls but forever changed by that night in a remote Airbnb cabin in the woods, I can't help but glance over my shoulder with every creak of my house settling into its foundation. Max is here by my side, vigilant as ever, a living reminder of how close we came to never returning home at all. The men? We never saw them again after that nightmarish encounter. And yet sometimes when I close my eyes, I see their shadowy figures standing on that porch, their intentions unknown and unfulfilled. A chilling reminder that not all horror stories need ghosts or ghouls to haunt you long after they're told. In the serene town of Maple Hollow, I, Ethan, a freelance writer, sought solitude and inspiration for my next novel. The online listing for an idyllic Airbnb set at the edge of the woods promised peace and quiet. The host's profile showed a smiling couple, the Clarks, who assured a comfortable stay at their cozy woodland retreat. Upon my arrival, I was greeted by the scent of pine and the warm glow of the cabin. Unbeknownst to me, the Clarks had an unsettling presence in the community and an unusual interest in their guests. As I pulled up to the quaint wooden cabin surrounded by towering pines at dusk, I noticed light pouring from its windows, casting a welcoming yet eerie glow. I stepped out of my car and took a moment to appreciate the charming exterior, almost missing the watchful eyes that I would later swear were hidden among the trees. Entering the cabin, I was immediately wrapped in warmth and coziness. The fireplace crackled invitingly, but something felt off. On the bedside table next to a moth-eaten diary lay an unfamiliar silver watch. It seemed peculiarly out of place, like an artifact from another world. A child's drawing pinned to the fridge caught my eye, a crude depiction of a family holding hands under a dark sky. These items weren't mine. They shouldn't be here. That night, as I lay in bed trying to grasp threads of my novel's plot, soft whispering crept through the walls. Dismissing it as wind playing tricks on me, I eventually succumbed to sleep. Morning light revealed muddy footprints leading nowhere on the wooden floor beside my bed. Footprints that started and finished in empty air. The cabin's walls were adorned with photographs of past guests, which seemed normal at first glance. However, as days passed, I noticed changes in these images. What started as smiles on familiar strangers subtly shifted day by day into looks of terror so raw that it felt like their fear might leap out and envelop me. One evening, with unease clawing at my chest, I approached Mrs. Clark, who was knitting in her chair, her smile too rigid to be real. As words tumbled out of my mouth, questioning these oddities, I saw Mr. Clark's silhouette fill the doorway behind her, a dark sentinel blocking my only escape path. Panic set its roots deep within me, and instinct spurred me into action. In a desperate attempt to uncover what lurked beneath the facade of this cozy woodland retreat, I stumbled upon a hidden door leading below the cabin. Descending rickety stairs into darkness with only a shaky flashlight beam guiding me, I discovered rooms shrouded in decades worth of secrets, belongings from numerous people who had passed through this place, mementos that told stories no words ever could. My heart raced as my beam fell upon pictures tacked to the wall. Not just Polaroids like those above, but newspaper clippings featuring headlines of missing persons, all who had once smiled above me in those changing photographs. My breath caught as realization dawned. This tranquil retreat held stories far removed from any idyllic vacation. Now I sit here, writing this account by dim lamplight. A cautionary tale, perhaps, or maybe just my last attempt to make sense of this web spun around me by hosts whose intentions are as dark as the shadows that now seem alive in every corner of this cabin. The door is locked from outside. I can hear Mr. Clark's heavy breath just beyond it. Mrs. Clark's knitting needles click rhythmically somewhere close by, and yet, there is hope. There must be. For as long as my words survive, I survive. Whoever reads this must know that amidst horrors masquerading as hospitality, human spirit can still find ways to press forward, even when paths vanish into night-shrouded woods.